that look like a slide?
Yep. Looks good. So one thing before Josh gets started, if you have questions during the presentation, go ahead and use the Q&A feature to type in your question, and that allows us to address it on the spot, but I'll also be reading those off as they come through. And also I'll have a few links in the chat box to share as well on any resources that we want to share from today's presentation. And this is being recorded, so if you miss anything or have a colleague that you want to share it with, we'll be sending that out afterwards. So go ahead, Josh.
All right, I'll keep the cursing to a minimum. So, in case anybody doesn't know, I'm Josh Vlach, entomologist, the Oregon Department of Agriculture. We deal with invasive species issues for all sorts of things, for forests, for crops, for the environment. And this is both in terms of like detection and attempting to eradicate, and then mitigating with biocontrol sometimes. So I'm just taking a few moments here just to I don't know, give some background information. So through 2007 through 2024, there have been 185 species, exotic species, new to Oregon, established or we need more data, but are likely established in Oregon. So that number keeps climbing, of course. And so it works out to be of an average of 10.3 species per year that get established. And there's actually another list of things that don't become established. So there's actually quite a bit more than 10 per year that come to the state. So you see 185, see in 2024 detected 11 new things. And you see there's quite a bit of variability over time. And so about 1 in 4 of those are known pests when they arrive. And so it might not be your crop of interest, but it's going to be affecting somebody's crop. So this is what was found in 2024. The ones in yellow are things that were known to be pests when they were detected. And this little thing's in my way. And the things in blue are parasitoids. And the thing in purple is bees. So we've introduced 7 bees since 2007 in Oregon. Only 5 of them are established that we know of. And the biocontrol agents, I know it sounds like a good thing, but if you bring them in and they attack native things, it's not necessarily good. And the things with lightning bolts next to them are things I don't expect. I expect them to eventually be switched over to the didn't establish list. The oak twig pruner and the longhorn beetle are from imported raw lumber. I expect that they won't actually establish. And an Aedes aegypti, that's in Southern Oregon. There's no reason that it should stay established. It should be eradicable. Just carries so many diseases. And so I expect that to be eradicated, but it does take money and time and effort. So we'll see, I guess. The worst thing that we detected last year is lab-led bug, also known as kudzu bug, that attacks beans. And this is a quick list of the things that didn't establish. Brown widow is something it's well established in Southern California. We're seeing it pretty often, but a lot of our mealybugs, you notice, is the citrus mealybug, the striped mealybug. And these are mostly coming on nursery stock. And so these are getting into the nursery systems and are at risk of moving here. They both have very broad host ranges and are good virus vectors, much like vine mealybug and these others. So they present a threat to agriculture in general. I also pointed that the spotted lanternfly, there were 3 detections of it last year. They were all dead, but one of them was very fresh. So it is just a matter of time before that comes. And that's something that the vineyard folks should be thinking about, because it's shown itself to be a significant vineyard pest in the eastern United States. And just in case you're not aware of it, this picture on the bottom in the right-hand corner is spotted lanternfly on grapevines. It's gotten as far west as Indiana at this point. And we found viable eggs in December of 2023 on a train and a rail car. So it won't be long before we see some here. So I don't know if we'll be able to respond to it or not. So that was a little background undercover. Jumping to vine mealybug. So on the left side of your screen is the female mealybug. That's the thing that's mostly sucking on your plants and generating the crawlers and things. But we're trapping for, on the right, the males. So they're the stage that can fly, and therefore we can monitor with pheromones. And so this is a trap that has like 799 males on it. And you see they're just like little bits of dust practically on there. And so this is what the inside of the traps would look like if you had a lot. And just, there are other mealybugs in Oregon that can be on grapes. They all tend to have longer tails. You see these waxy tails. They're not permanent features. They're made of wax. They could break, but vine mealybug, which is in the upper right-hand corner, surrounded by red, its tails tend to be shorter than half the body length, or body width, sorry. Whereas most of the other species are as wide as the body or longer. And then we have Gill's mealybug, which has those little glassy rods all over it. It looks quite a bit different. So just teeny bit of background. It was right, OSU trapping detected this in 2021 in Jackson County at 2 properties, 2 vineyards. And that prompted a wine board funded additional delimitation trapping, which is basically this intensive trapping to try to, where you put lots of traps out to try to understand where the insects are. And that caught 25,000 male mealybugs at over 300 trap sites. And it also increased the number of properties that were known. And so for 2023, we were able to get some funding. So we had still the wine board funding. There was legislative funding that was gotten or received. And so that was used for delimitations, both in Jackson County, but also in, it started a statewide survey, which at that time, because it was state funds and the biennium didn't start till July, that was voluntary, and OSU helped get folks to join up on that. And we were able to survey 11 counties, 74 vineyards, and that added two new counties, right? A site both in Douglas and a site in Lynn County. And and also all the treat, and OSU was able to get cooperation from some of the product suppliers and get treatments done on all the known sites at that time. So that was mating disruption and Movento treatments. And so 2024, we still had that same state funding. And so we had delimitations, right? And this is usually like 200 to 300 traps per delimitation, if not more, in Douglas, Lynn, and Jackson counties, because we had the new detections from the voluntary statewide survey. In 2024, the positive properties were treated in all 3 counties using mating disruption again and Movento. We did from the state funding have a treatment reimbursement as an option. And so 5 properties, 5 facilities were reimbursed, and there's actually a 6th one that's not quite done yet. So the 2024 is really good news. If anybody asks, they say, I got trapped. What did I have vine mealybug? If you haven't heard, then you don't have it for sure. All the people that have vine mealybug have been contacted at this point. I think you can see here, this is the statewide survey, and you can see that there's some of these dots are on top of each other, but there's like 200 plus vineyards and 16 counties trapped. So most of the major vineyard wine producing places in the state. Nothing in Central Oregon though. So we had a second Douglas County detection. Lynn County didn't have any additional, but they still had positive traps in spite of treatment, which was troubling. But other than that, all other sites, all the Jackson County sites and the original Douglas County sites were all negative for vine mealybug males, which is somewhat expected because the mating disruption interferes with the traps. But generally good news, right? We didn't really find it. We trapped pretty extensively. Didn't find it in additional places very much. Yeah, the 2 Douglas County sites are pretty close to each other. So overall, it was a really good news for 2024. And so if we look forward to 2025, we still have some of that state funding, but the biennium goes July 2023 to June 2025. So our funding will expire after June. So since we don't anticipate getting additional funding, unfortunately trapping will, unless we make new arrangements or find some other way to do it, will stop in June. But we will start to do the statewide survey, which will be an ODA-led trapping program, which I didn't really mention in the 2024 slide, but so that was all placed by our field technicians as an ODA trapping program. And then we'll start the delimitations. There'll be one large one in Jackson County, 2 in Douglas County, and 1 in Lynn County. And the growers should be treating their properties, but there is not going to be any reimbursement available in the spring here. So, but overall, we're in about as good a place as I could have hoped at this point. One of the things I mentioned is with the quarantine, right? So a lot of these properties are quarantined. But the way the quarantine works is the quarantine can be lifted after a site has had 3 consecutive years of negative trap results. And so all the Jackson County sites are eligible for that. But because of the disruptive nature of the mating disruption, right, that it's basically using the pheromone, which is what we use in the traps as well. If they want to have that clear 3rd year, they need to, and have the quarantine removed, they need to not use mating disruption for that season. So there's a lot to learn in this year if people choose to go this route, because it will really see like what has happened to the actual numbers of mealybugs in these at these sites. You know, how early were we in with these treatments? How effective are the treatments? I really hope we won't catch any mealybugs if somebody chooses to try to get out of quarantine. But we don't know yet. So, I mean, the question is really, really one for the state and the industry. You know, where do we want to go from here? I mean, right now, we're in about as good of a place as I could imagine. Seems like vine mealybugs fairly isolated. We've got good tools for monitoring and treatment. So do we want to continue a program like this and continue to suppress vine mealybug? If not, I feel like the big regulations should probably be changed so places don't get quarantined. If we're not gonna work to suppress vine mealybug, then we shouldn't have it as a quarantine pest, because that's an impediment to a lot of these growers. And so, you know, then that becomes a question of like, well, what do we do? I would hope that we don't want to let it run free. I feel like the impacts of that are too great, but it's not really up to me. And so I would emphasize, you know, partly based on what I was showing in the beginning, you know, we're continuously bringing in new pests into the state. Certainly some of them are potential great pests. Those mealybugs come on all sorts of plants, including ornamental plants. You know, take precautions, you know, both as for a vine mealybug, being careful of what plant material you bring on your facility. And keep in mind that it can come on other hosts, and these other mealybugs come on other hosts. Be cautious with if you are infested, be cautious, or we're positive, be careful when you sell your grapes that the receiving company winery knows to take care, because mealybugs potentially survive crushing. But yeah, there's this whole paper here, Walton et al., the grapevine leaf roll and mealybug prevention and management, that most of the quarantine is based upon, and it's good guidelines for just best practices. Anyway, I guess that was pretty short, but I feel like that covers most of what I would want to cover.
So, Josh, if you could speak a little bit about how, what kind of efforts that, you know, the traps were placed. They were pheromone baited traps. If you could speak a little bit more about how those were placed in 2024, kind of timeline wise, and whether they were cycled in and out, or did you just leave out the traps? And just reiterate that there weren't ground-based searching for the female mealybug.
Right. Yeah. So you know, there was no searches for females. I mean, because what we've been told anyway is that until populations get pretty high, and maybe the trap catches get to be around 1,000, there's almost no chance you're going to find the females. So it's not a very good survey method at low levels. And so, right, we have the 2 different surveys, right? We have these delimitations where densely placed traps were 200 to 300 traps were placed around a known positive site, and fairly close in kind of like circles. And so those traps were placed out by, I think they started going out in April, and they were mostly all out in May. And then those were out all the way out through September. And yeah, they were having their lures changed on regular intervals, being checked on a fairly regular intervals. The goal was monthly, but that wasn't true for all of them. And then the statewide survey, we were trying to have approximately 300 vineyards And I do need to go back through that data and see what, because we also did some nurseries and we did some other kinds of sites that were wine related, but vineyard related, that weren't just vineyards. So, but I said, we should have at least 200 vineyards in there. And all those sites had at least 3 traps placed at them. And those were kind of the same thing where we had a 3-month, the lure that we had, I think was supposed to last 3 months. And so all the traps were at least checked that often. And yeah, in case you don't know, trap, little red delta. And it has a little gray, I don't have, this one doesn't have it in it, but a little gray, looks like a little stopper that has the pheromone embedded in it that gets put inside.
And you were only looking for vine mealybug, not any other mealybugs in the trapping efforts, correct?
Right. Well, I mean, the goal is that the pheromone should make it fairly specific. So we're hoping
Yeah,
to see
but
about
you only had the vine mealybug traps, not any others. Okay.
Yeah, we certainly weren't looking for great mealybug or anything like that. And I mean, and see, yeah, I should go back. I don't actually have the data, but the non-target trap catches were very, very, very low. And we actually didn't catch very many vine mealybugs anyway. It was only like, well, I didn't have that number in there. I don't think it was only like 28 or something. It was a nicely low number.
Okay, so I see Alec is on, and I'd like Alec to just talk a little bit about what growers are doing in your area since the initial find and what they've been doing over the last couple of years in the feeling in terms of success in dealing with this issue.
Yeah, thank you. I so I think that people have been pretty motivated to get on top of this issue in Jackson County. Obviously once it was identified and we learned sort of where it was and the degree to which it had become established, people were very concerned. And when the emergency funding came through, it was really nice to be able to get all the traps that were paid for and get the traps out and teach the growers, how to put them out and the best places to put them out and to work with those that were concerned. People have been monitoring, they've been treating, and in some cases going above and beyond just Movento applications. Some people that are very concerned or close to some of the original high catch areas. We're using some neonics as well, like injectable chemigation, to put, to just as another way of controlling the issue. And it seems to have been working. I mean, obviously, based on what Josh said, the numbers are low to zero, at least in Jackson County, it seems like. And of course, we don't know to what degree that's the trap shutdown from the mating disruption, but the suppression efforts have been successful. And my messaging has been cautiously optimistic and just telling people that we're not out of the woods yet, that it's not eradicated by any stretch of the imagination, but I think people are feeling good. I think that they're looking forward to 2025 and having a chance to lift a quarantine, those properties that have been quarantined. I think that the biggest concern remains with those, and I don't know off the top of my head how many there are, but those producers that are, I don't know if there's anyone who is organic and quarantined. There might be one or two, but those that are organic, they don't really have a whole lot of options beyond mating disruption to use to control the pest. So given that the third year to lift the quarantine requires not using mating disruption, I think that it's kind of like holding your breath to hope that you don't get any catches and get a re-up on the quarantine. So I don't know if there's any, Josh or Vaughn maybe could, after maybe Vaughn has a chance to update on the statewide level, but if there's any sort of methodology for organic producers, if you're quarantined and organic and you can't use mating disruption, I think that that's the biggest question that I always get. It's like, what can be done? And I don't know there's a whole lot. But anyways, just to summarize, like have been proactive, and it seems like it's been working really well. It's kind of a little bit of no news is good news. We've in 2024 we got far less questions and sort of requests for technical support than we did in 2023, and so I take that as a good sign, and that people are sort of coming around that this is an unfortunate situation, but something that can be managed.
So I see Vaughn had typed in that long-term strategy, will it be similar to spongy moth or other insect pests with similar risk? I think that's probably a question for Josh. Or Vaughn, you can speak up if you intended something differently with that question or comment.
But Josh will likely give a good answer. But the way I'm seeing it, it's like we're at risk. That risk has increased. We know the biology of the insect. It's kind of like a longer term management where it is a good idea to have a strategy in the long run, maybe not quite at the level that we had been in the past 2 years. I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear what Josh says about that.
Yeah, I don't know. We probably could do some kind of statistical analysis to say, like, what percentage of vineyards do we need to survey at what intervals to have a certain amount of confidence that we're monitoring adequately, that kind of thing. But yeah, I would imagine kind of like maybe something along the lines of our Japanese beetle monitoring, where we've got traps around the state at various levels. We move them around every year. Maybe not as large as that, because it's often like 5,000 traps, but something kind of long term, because the pressure isn't going to decrease from the south, and then it's still likely that there's infested facilities here in Oregon that we haven't detected yet, right? Because the traps aren't long distance wise, do not track from great distance, and we have not sampled all vineyard growing areas, facilities yet. But yeah, I would agree. From my point of view, the best plan would be to have a long-term trapping strategy to monitor across the state, and an ability to respond and then suppress at individual facilities when it's found.
So for Japanese beetle, can you explain how that program works, Josh?
So that's the risk is different, right? So Japanese beetle is a big risk because it's a terrible turf pest, causes lots of pesticide use in the east, but it also attacks roses and all sorts of above ground plants as well, hundreds of species. But anyway, it's attracted to jet fuel, and so it comes in at the airport on a routine basis. And so over the last 80 years, we've done lots of interventions at the airport to keep it from establishing. And then occasionally the more difficult ones is that people bring the grandma's roses from New York State or something with soil, which is prohibited. You're not allowed to bring soil from a Japanese beetle infested area, but people aren't aware of the regulation and they bring it, and then you get something in Medford or somewhere else, and then that's why we have to have traps all over the place, because that happens every now and again. And so yeah, then we would do the delimitation, figure out where the properties are. Sometimes we can determine actually what plant it came on. We can eventually narrow it down to the actual site that it was brought in on, and then we do it's also granular treatments of the soil and eradicate. And so this would be similar in a lot of the ways, in the sense that we would do delimitation trapping. We probably need to figure out what the best density is. In some ways, I feel like our density could be too high, but I'm not sure yet. But determining if we can tell this appears to have come from the southwest corner of this vineyard, and then you can say, well, where did you buy these plants from? Then maybe we can go back to that produced the grower, wherever they bought the plants from, and say, hey, did you guys have an issue? You can do back tracing, tracebacks. See, did they sell to other people at that same time? Anyway, that's how we do with nursery stock as well, is you have tracebacks to figure out the source of a problem and hopefully find other places that might have been impacted as well.
Do you have for that insect, the funding for that, is that federal funding, or how does it fund the state? Because it must cost a ton of money to take care of all these things.
Yeah, Japanese beetle is the federal government. The only thing they do is they monitor airports, and so they restrict movement at airports. Otherwise, they don't give us any money. So So yeah, those are state funds. Those are regular state funds that we would get to do the trapping programs. It used to be very cheap. The monitoring is, I mean, it's not super cheap, but the monitoring could have been like $50,000 a year or something like that to do a big statewide survey, which is a lot, but also not a lot for the extensiveness of it. And then when you get eradication, then you're talking potentially millions of dollars, right? That's the trade-off, is that it's actually cheaper to monitor over the long term, and then you have to do an eradication, and there's no guarantees, and you're going to spend a bunch of money, right? But yeah, state funds, those are state funds.
So Josh, you mentioned that in 2025, there will be a statewide survey as well. Is that still on the legislative funding, or is that some other funding source that's going to cover that?
Yeah, so yeah, we have enough funding, we believe, to get the delimitations started. And we're gonna try some different avenues to see if we can find other sources of funding to continue the whole season. But right now it'll just be we're just planning through June basically. But yeah, we should be able to get those delimitations out, because we feel like that's the most important thing, because that's going to affect these growers who want to get out of quarantine. And then we should be able to get some level of statewide surveying. So, but that'll be through June basically, which isn't, the peak catches we've had have generally been July and August.
So I just want to mention, if you are a participant online, if you have any questions, feel free to ask those in the Q&A area, and we'll address those. But I do know that a lot of the people, at least who are online right now, are mostly from the Willamette Valley. So I think people are just trying to be aware of what's going on and not just be in a healthy state of awareness rather than too much concern. I know that there were some people that chose to put in their own vine mealybug traps in 2024. And I don't know, Vaughn, if you heard from anybody who was just casually monitoring. Obviously, we don't expect you to give answer in terms of which places were impacted, but did you hear of more growers putting out traps, whether they are vine mealybug or otherwise?
I know some of our consulting companies have placed traps quite extensively. I've not heard anything. Maybe you also hadn't. Maybe if you did, you would have told us.
That's right. No news is good news. I have not
that's
heard
good news. But one thing I was wondering about just a minute ago was this site here in the Willamette Valley. Can you tell us, you don't have to say where the site is or anything like that, but was that, so you had traps out there and did find some insects there. I think the total number of insects that I remember from the email you had in the whole of Oregon was 3 insects or something like that, 3 males. So that is with no management or with management. Just a little bit of information from that be really great. Thank you, Josh.
You're talking about the Lynn County, I assume?
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah, so they treated with Movento, and they also used mating disruption. The one difference they did from as far as I know, all the other sites used the hangers, the physically placed hangers, and they used the spray mating disruption there, where I think you have to apply that. I don't know if it's monthly, but you have to apply it much more frequently. And so I don't know if that's why we were seeing adults still, or seeing males still. It was because that mating disruption isn't as thorough. You have gaps maybe where it's weaker or something like that. But yeah, it was a low number. Unfortunately, I don't have those numbers right in front of me.
It's under 10, and that's nothing. It feels like but as you said earlier, this is always the thing, is we have our traps out. Those traps are fallible. It doesn't necessarily tell us what the population is. It tells us how effective the traps are. It's impacted likely by mating disruption. So likely, if you look at Southern Oregon, that site, if they do indeed stop doing mating disruption and maybe all these other treatments there, we won't see we won't get a very clear indication of whether it was eradicated we need time, and I think that's why you have the 3-year zeros. Yeah, cautious optimism, I guess, is the right word here.
Yeah, I think after this season, if a number of the, especially if some of the bigger vineyards choose to go without mating disruption, and so, say if in those cases we find that, yes, we're still catching some, then I do feel like maybe that's one of those cases where maybe we should all sit down and talk about altering the quarantine. Like, well, maybe eradication isn't possible, so then we need to alter the quarantine so these places are no longer economically affected the same way under the quarantine. Whereas if they come back there and we get zeros, I mean, that'll be a super pleasant surprise. And then so maybe they can get out from under quarantine, and maybe we can have a lot more hope about this, but we won't know until the end of the season, unfortunately.
Josh, and I'm asking, I guess, almost as much for myself as for anyone who may not know. Altering the quarantine process is an industry-driven process. Is that correct?
Yeah. So it was done with the last time it was done, it was actually done in collaboration with Washington.
Mm.
So it was actually a pretty big process. I think it took a year. I mean, it is not, it's not uncumbersome necessarily. It's not the simplest thing. But yeah, so it was basically us, you guys, ODA, you guys, and the Oregon industry could decide to make changes. But it would take time. It takes meetings, and there has to be a consensus, and there's public meetings. Then, it's a public rulemaking process.
So who sends the first email to start that process? That's always my question.
Anyone can, honestly.
Okay.
I mean, in my experience, it's faster moving if industry pushes on it.
Sure.
There's plenty of rules that I'd actually like to change, but I don't usually have the time if no one else is interested in them. Put that on the top of my list of things to do. So yeah, I'd say probably them, and then you guys would make it a little higher priority, and then we're at the bottom of the list. Nobody cares about what we think.
So we do have a question. If the mealybugs are taking refuge in some of their other host plants nearby vineyards, how long would you recommend for growers who had their quarantine lifted to begin monitoring again?
I mean, I would say that from here on out, people should be monitoring forever, right? I mean, the pressure of introduction of vine mealybug is just going to be too high, and they should just it should be something that people are expecting to do from here on out to prevent establishment, because nipping at the bug is way easier. Yeah, that was one of the things we considered early in the beginning, whether or not to have a spray that would treat adjacent plants, because we didn't know how well the crawlers would jump over to other plants, like say in the landscape. We haven't seen evidence of that here yet, and I've not really heard it discussed in California much. I don't know if Vaughn ever, I mean, South Africa was a very different climate, I guess, so I don't know what the situation Vaughn might have observed there. It doesn't seem like it seems like they really like to stay on the grapevines, but so
I don't think that the hosts are necessary, surrounding hosts. Look at the vineyards. We really do take very good care of our vines. They have very high nutrient value, and the surrounding plants, especially in summer here, really don't have the same value of nutrients. And it's never been that big of an issue in surrounding vegetation.
Yeah, and that's one of the delimitations. Yeah, so if we're doing delimitation density trapping this summer, and some of the vineyards don't do mating disruption, I mean, optimally, I guess we would have traps dense enough that we could, I mean, unfortunately, these things do fly and can be blown by the wind a little bit, but maybe get an idea whether things weren't in the vineyard proper, possibly. But it is complicated by the fact that these fly and that they're blown by the wind pretty easily. So, but my main message would be like people should be trapping to make sure they don't have a refuge population, and if they do, maybe they do look at treating some host that maybe they think is associated.
So there's another question. Under mating disruption, is there any reason to suspect that female mealybugs would be more likely to reproduce without mating or parthenogenically?
See, I'm rusty on this part. No, I don't think the species likes to be parthenogenetic very much. So I don't recall that being a particularly high concern for vine mealybug. But I don't. Vaughn, do you remember other
I'll
parthenogenetic?
try my best. So we were recently looking at that question, and we're not able to find that much. There was a scientist in South America who looked at reduced reproductive potential. It was not under controlled conditions. If we look at trial work, it had mostly been field work. There hadn't been kind of detailed insect biology work under controlled conditions. But given the results that we've seen over time, we don't quite understand the mechanism of mating disruption. We know it's very different than for lepidopterans, moth pests as an example. But we do know that it works. And how it works, the exact mechanism can be looked at a little bit more. But I'm not, parthenogenesis, that needs to be teased out a little bit more. We suspect that there isn't, as you said, Josh, but we don't have good data, at least not what I'm aware of. And when I say that, I asked two students in my lab to do the literature search about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they just could not find anything. Maybe they looked in the wrong place, maybe they missed something, but it was not obviously available.
Yeah, I don't recall seeing anything for other Planococcus, same genus like citrus mealybug. I don't recall it having anything about parthenogenesis either. So maybe that genus isn't particularly prone to it.
So I know that the focus of this webinar is specifically vine mealybug, but I know that a lot of efforts are in place to also keep the grape mealybug at bay. And Vaughn's lab is doing work on grape mealybug and specifically looking at the pheromone traps. Vaughn, do you want to take a minute and just talk a little bit about the grape mealybug work that you're doing?
Thank you, Patty. So, for us to look at, solutions, I think is really important. Grape mealybug, the biggest challenge had always been the cost of the pheromone, prohibitively expensive. We did do work this past season, where we were able to custom make some dispensers, did some work in 4 locations here in the state of Oregon, and the data looks good. The insect biology is a little bit different than vine mealybug. It develops slower. It has a lower reproductive potential. We're generally finding lower levels of population increase, but it's here, and it can spread the virus, the leaf roll virus. So it still is, it's maybe one of those non catastrophic type problems, but still it causes the spread of leaf roll virus. So data that we got looked good. We understand that we're getting much closer to commercialization of the product. I was approached by one of our companies here on the West Coast to do additional to the OSU work, do some additional trials this year on another commercial formulation. So my sense is that the pheromone companies are getting closer to synthesizing the pheromone much cheaper than had been historically. And so that's a good sign, I think. I do think that mating disruption for this specific insect, grape mealybug, would, if we're able to provide materials at a reasonable cost to growers, I think it will be as good or better than vine mealybug. So, these feels as if there's light at the end of the tunnel. We're maybe not quite there yet, but the data looks good. We're kind of excited. What also is interesting is biocontrol. Biocontrol really does play a very important role in any of the mealybug species that we find anywhere in the world. And the problem with biocontrol is it takes long. It's a lengthy, the insect can survive 2-3 weeks after it's been parasitized. It can still transmit the virus. It's not a standalone. But one thing that Alexander Butcher had done this past season is had collected parasitoids on sticky traps. Those were sent to Josh Vlach for identification. We're hoping that it is Anagyrus pseudococci, which is a commonly found parasitoid. There might be 1 or 2 others, hopefully as well. So that's, I think we do have biocontrol now. We're just looking at mating disruption. Yes, Alexander, it is true that we don't have good tools for organic, but at least we do have mating disruption, So, yeah.
And I should mention that for the pest guide that we produce each year for the wine grape pest guide, we have had mating disruption in that guide since 2024 when it was available commercially and registered in the state. So if you do have questions about some of the mealybug control, we do have that included in our pest guide. So there's another question. So phosphine gas for treatment of dormant vines and dormant rootstock scion is an acceptable treatment for mealybug eggs in California currently. ODA is willing to consider the treatment protocol as part of the Oregon quarantine. Is there any experience on the panel regarding the efficacy of this treatment? Oh, you're muted, Vaughn.
I'm sure you saw me shaking my head now. Sorry, Chad. I don't have. It's something one would need to look into a little bit. Alexander Butcher is also doing nematodes on nursery material work, which that data does look very promising. Nematodes typically, so phosphine gas, one methodology, another might be nematodes. Movento would be another one as well. So there are options. I think treating plant materials, that is really important. It is just finding those treatments, finding the best treatments is just the process that needs to continue.
Yeah, all I was going to say is I'm not familiar with was it phosphine? I'm not familiar with that treatment. I would have to go and look in the literature to see anything about it or contact people that actually deal with that treatment.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. And I'm going to show I have one more thing I want to share. And this was, I promised Alexander, Vaughn's student, that I would share this. And so he's collecting data from growers about your concerns about vine mealybug. So feel free to, there's a link in the chat, or you can scan this QR code and answer a few questions about vine mealybug. In extension and anytime we do research, it's always good to hear directly from growers about concerns. So please do complete that questionnaire for Alexander and the Walton Lab. That would be greatly appreciated. I don't see any other questions coming up. I think maybe to wrap this up is there one thing, Josh, Vaughn, and Alec, that you want to kind of suggest or mention that growers could do this year to kind of protect against vine mealybug?
It's worth putting a trap out. That's all I have.
I'm glad you said that. I was going to say the same thing, but I'm not an entomologist. So I was like, oh, I think you should probably do some trapping.
Yeah, even if you're not reporting what you're finding at ODA, I guess that would be my preference would be to report if you find positives, but if you're actually taking action against it, it's better than nothing.
Yeah,
And I
I
know
agree. Go
one
ahead.
thing that one thing that Rick Hilton used to do when there was sort of a dual, I think it was mostly the efforts were on the grape mealybug side, but Rick used to always put out a vine mealybug trap with the grape mealybug trap at the same time, because it was sort of again, I'm not an entomologist, so I might explain this poorly, but he was saying something like, well, you know, if you get a really high catch in the grape mealybug trap and the vine mealybug trap is sort of nearby, and you get, you know, 5, 6, you know, individuals in the vine mealybug trap, could be that it's grape mealybug males that kind of like waft into that trap, and sort of having the high catch number of the grape mealybug trap nearby maybe provides some evidence that whatever's in the vine mealybug trap is actually grape mealybug. I don't know if that flies or not, but Rick always said that it was good to do both, just to get in a sense of like what's really out there, and at what population.
Well, I will say that with the these paper traps with their ends closed, that we don't catch a lot of grape mealybug by accident in them. It's usually other things, if we do find any other mealybugs at all. And so
If you want to hold that up again, I removed there you go. And the trap ends that are folded like that. Yep.
they fold in. That seems to make a big difference if you leave them open, or if you use the plastic traps where have a much bigger opening, we seem to get quite a bit more bycatch. And if these are closed up, then it's not 100% vine mealybug, but it greatly reduces the chances of there being non-target mealybug males in there.
Yeah, and if you receive these traps, there's instructions that come with them to show you how to do it. So if you're wondering about that, and Sutera's great, they also have a video on how to fold the traps if you've never done that before. Also, good point that came up is that from the Q&A is to put traps out in new plantings. So it doesn't have to be first planted this year. I just think in general, young plantings, and especially when we're getting vines from outside of the state. Doesn't mean that we're immune from it with in-state produced plants, but for the majority, out of state is going to be a larger concern. So thanks for that reminder, Chad.
And Vaughn just reminded me privately to mention to the panelists, and not the panelists, excuse me, the participants here. We do finally have a new entomologist here at SOREC, serving the Southern Oregon region. He just started in January, and so he's a little bit drinking from a fire hose right now, because he's got responsibilities beyond just grapes, but he will be working quite a bit on grapes and vineyard systems. So his name is Robert Orpit, very skilled, talented young man. We're very happy to have him, and it really will help shoulder some of this burden in beyond just the vine mealybug situation. But if anyone has any questions or would like his contact information, please, I don't think he's on our website just yet, so just reach out to me.
Yeah, it's really great to have him on board. It's a 10-year track position, which generally means longer term person staying, and that's what we really are glad to have him join the team. Yeah. All right, I don't see any other questions, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up. I want to just say thank you to Josh for all of the work that you did in 2024 and wrapping that up and producing a nice report that you could share with us today, and for Vaughn and Alec and providing support for all of the vine mealybug work that's been going on over the last couple of years. So thank you all for joining, and thank you those of you who joined online. A recording of this will be available if you wish to share it with others. We have it on our OSU Viticulture Extension YouTube channel, with all other Vit Now seminars. And if you have any other questions or topics you'd like to see covered in these Vit Now seminars in the future, just drop me a note either by email or even in the chat. That would be great. We want to just keep people up to speed with what's going on out there. Thank you, everyone.